Welcome to a solo episode. I thought I'd just try something a little bit different. I want to do more quarter year reflections. And as you know, I started this podcast and it's been now 4 months. I want to go back till September to December 2025. I wanted to make sure everything was perfect, everything was going to plan. But of course, this is life here we're talking about. So I thought in this episode and future quarter year reflection episodes, bit of a mouthful that, but let's just talk about how I started the podcast. When I speak to my guests, I love talking about their journeys. And the first question always asked is, when you hear the words bold voices, messy journeys, zero apologies, which part of your journey does that represent? I think I'm going to do that for myself here. Another thing that I was experimenting with on the podcast was also not just to talk about the deeper issues of being an underrepresented creative. I also wanted to talk about the fun things, the messy bits that nobody talks about. So one of the segments I love to do also to talk about on the podcast is Studio Draw. This is where I talk to guests about their behind the scenes. It's a part of the conversation I love to have with the guests. In September last year, I was a bit anxious about trying to get this podcast going, not because I didn't believe in the actual project. It was more about I wanted to start, but I never really properly started. I did go on a workshop. It was an Emerging Voices podcast accelerator. Uete, we'll link her details below. It was very helpful because I learned quite a lot about starting a podcast and what to do and how to create one. But the thing I was fearful of was basically the advice that was given to me was just to start. The fear that I had was that I didn't feel like at the time I was ready to start the podcast. And one of the things, the biggest fear was, will I have enough guests? She suggested was to just do 3-4 episodes and get them out. But the problem I was having was, my concern was because I wanted it to be a guest run podcast. So I have my guests on, talk about the subjects in question and talk to underrepresented creatives in the industry. But the problem was I was not getting going. I wasn't beginning. I wasn't starting. She just said, just start off with the first few and that will be enough time for you to, find more guests later on. But that was still niggling in the back of my mind. Why are we holding and why are we hiding our work? Do you think that our work is hurting our reach? And I did feel that I was hurting myself by not starting my podcast immediately when I thought I had everything in place. There was a fear of not having enough guests, and that was stopping me. And I think that's a lot of creatives' kind of state of mind. Even though I was prepared, I was sabotaging my own efforts before I even begun. And it was crippling because I thought, okay, maybe it's not enough to start a podcast. And so when I finally pushed that button and got out of my own way, I finally decided a launch date. It was quiet. Nobody talked about it that much. Obviously, no one knew about it, but it was fine. So one of the things I needed to do was put less pressure on myself. And while I was making the first few episodes and I got new guests on to the podcast, this advice to myself and probably to you is, are you hiding your work? And if you're hiding your work, is it hurting your reach? How can I reach out to the people I want to reach out to if I don't have the guests? So this vicious circle of, will I start? Do I have enough guests? It was kind of crippling. And the advice was, just start and see how you go. Learn it as you go along throughout the process. I needed to be prepared. That's just the way I am. I was sabotaging my own efforts before I even begun. So once I finally decided what date I wanted to launch it, it was all systems go. There was no turning back. So I learned a few lessons at this, and changing direction was probably one of the best things that I did. It was a slight detour, you could say, a new direction. Instead of just doing guest episodes, I knew that I could add solo episodes. And I think once I made that decision, it made more sense. If I can't rely on the guests, I'll just do a solo episode. It didn't have to be rigid, it didn't have to be set in stone. There was room to maneuver, in other words. So once I made that decision, it was a bit of a relief. And another thing, making sure that there was time to promote each episode was also important. Deciding on just doing 2 episodes a month, that made things a lot easier. So once I made that decision, systems would go. So at the end of 2025, the podcast finally launched. So once I took that pressure off, it was easier. It was easier to start. It was easier to show up. it was just a whole lot easier. I've been thinking about visibility, and visibility isn't necessarily the problem, it's the fear that's the problem. So, learning along the way that perfectly imperfect means accepting that fear, anxiety, and vulnerability. We're human. We're going to have flaws. That's just part of our makeup. That's part of our DNA. And once you learn more about yourself, you find that you know what your limitations are. Maybe you want to push through those comfort zones. But either way, I think once you know how to turn things around, you know what your boundaries are, you know how to push them. And maybe you want to accept them. That's great. Once the podcast finally did launch, opportunities happen. That's what happens when you stop hiding behind your fears. You find that more doors open and some doors close. Knowing what you know, which direction to go in, is probably a relief and it's beneficial. You know how far you want to push it. And in my case, I knew which guests I wanted to go onto the podcast and I knew what direction I wanted to take it. It's always going to be experimental. But that's part of the beauty of trying new things and trying it different ways and different tactics. It's always going to be a learning curve. And of course, being visible, you need to show some of your work. So there's some episodes that I'm happy with, and there's some like, I could do something different there. But to be honest, as more episodes go into the show, things get buried. Some things I'm surprised that people have been interested in and think, oh, that wasn't a very good episode for me, but it was very insightful to the listener. And at the end of the day, that's what was important. And I have to keep on reminding myself of that. So I'm going to turn things around and ask you a few questions actually. Are you relying on quality alone to carry your message, or are you relying on perfectionism? What opportunities might you have already talked yourself out of? Because I know that I've backed myself in a corner and not gone forward with some ideas because I was telling myself that it's not possible. And whose opinion are you actually afraid of? Why does it hold that much power? My advice here is just to make sure that you just start. Whatever you're doing, whatever you're creating. And on reflection, why hiding your work is hurting your reach, the people that you need to show your work and your creativity. By not starting, hiding behind, in my case, strategy, research, everything else but actually recording and making a podcast episode, I was hurting my reach and my visibility. Perfectly imperfect means accepting that fear, anxiety and vulnerability, inheriting unvaluable parts of being a human being. Instead of dismissing it, we're celebrating it here on the podcast. These are many questions I would love to know. If you are interested in being on the podcast, we'd love you to be a guest. All the details will be in the description of this episode. I'm always looking for creative, bold voices and messy journeys and zero unapologetic creatives like yourself. You can find me on Instagram at Creatively Eccentric and YouTube. Oh yes, I'm on YouTube as well. I'm also on LinkedIn at Heather Ebanks. You never know what doors will open up to you. So don't hide your work. Don't hide yourself. Love to hear it, and other people on this podcast would love to hear your stories. I will speak to you soon.